Hey everyone, welcome to the Balanced Lens, where we examine faith, culture, and politics from a balanced perspective. I say balanced because we try to lay out the facts, offer pragmatic analysis, and then apply a biblical Christian worldview. Today we are talking about a really hot topic, ICE. There's some irony in that, but it is a topic that's evoking a lot of fear in the world right now, especially in the United States. We have riots that have been happening and many protests around the country regarding this hot topic. And so this is part two of an episode that we filmed back in October. So if you're interested in researching the history of ICE, the implications of illegal immigration and legal immigration, I encourage you to go back to October, listen to episode 4 of our podcast. But to begin with, to recap some of the functionality of ICE and why it's important. What exactly is ICE's role and why are they important in our country right now?
ICE stands for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It has over 22,000 employees and it's a DHS agency. So DHS stands for the Department of Homeland Security. ICE was created in 2003 under President Bush to enforce immigration and customs law inside the United States. And it is distinct from CBP, which is a Customs and Border Protection, and that agency works at the border and ports of entry. Here are the major arms of ICE. The two major ones, number one, ERO, which stands for the Enforcement and Removal Operations. This is what people see when they watch TV. It's got over 10,000 employees. They handle arrests, detention, and deportations. So they're the enforcement arm. The second is the Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, which also has over 10,000 employees. And they focus on transnational crime like smuggling, trafficking, fraud, and export violations. There is a third smaller arm of ICE, which it's called OPLA, which are the lawyers. It's got about 2,000 employees. So they are the ones who are always looking at the judiciary aspects of the law and enforcements, etc. So it's very organized in terms of how they're split apart and they work together to enforce the laws in the US. Now, in terms of importance, it's actually pretty practical. It's a primary engine of interior deportations and detention. ICE embodies the post 9/11 decision to treat unauthorized presence and migration-related offenses through a lens of security than just a civil administrative issue. Congress is the one that established it, and it has explicitly granted ICE agents authority to arrest without a warrant for immigration violations and certain federal crimes where there is probable cause or when an offense occurs in their presence. So they have been given wide-ranging authorities by Congress, and this is something that is important. Congress has created and sets a standard for these organizations to function.
Yeah, and it's important to understand the scope of what ICE does, as you alluded to, right? There's one side that does enforcement and removal operations, right? That's what you see the media playing everywhere. But the other side of the ICE, the other division, is also important as well, HSI. And they do a lot of work with human trafficking, child exploitation, drug and weapons trafficking, money laundering, cybercrime, document identity fraud. And so HSI worked with the FBI, they work with the DEA, local police, international partners. And so ICE is much more broader than like what you're seeing on TV. There's a lot of good work that they do in our country to enforce law and to capture criminals. But on the topic of capturing criminals, right, there's a lot of fear right now in our country. And the fear is that you're going to be driving down the street to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, wherever you get your coffee from. An ICE agent's going to pull up next to you. They're going to point a gun at you, tell you to get out of your car without asking for any papers or talking to you. They're going to throw you in a van and take you off and ship you to some jail like in another island, right? I think that's the portrayal that the media is presenting. And a lot of people are genuinely scared because they see this. And so we want to speak to that fear, right? Who is ICE allowed to apprehend? Can they randomly stop people or cars? Are they breaking the law in doing so?
So ICE is allowed to apprehend people who are removable under immigration law. For example, those who entered without inspection, those who overstayed visas or have certain criminal convictions. They can also remove individuals suspected of specific federal crimes related to immigration, customs, and national security. Outside homes and workplaces, ICE officers can stop and briefly detain individuals, similar to any other federal officers, if they have reasonable suspicion based on specific facts that an immigration violation or federal offense may be occurring, and can arrest without a warrant if probable cause develops, not randomly. It's very important to understand this. They cannot simply stop cars or people at random or based solely on race, ethnicity, or language. Settlements and ICE's own policies require reasonable suspicion and documentation of specific facts that justified a vehicle stop or a warrantless arrest. So, as an example, there was a nationwide settlement that bars ICE from using pretextual traffic stops rooted in racial profiling, and it obliges agents to record concrete basis for any vehicle stop or collateral arrest on the standard ICE report form. So this is a form they all have to fill after they have apprehended or arrested somebody. When ICE officers do conduct stops or arrests without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, especially when there is racial profiling or fabricated traffic pretests that can be shown and proved, they are violating constitutional and statutory limits, even if they invoke immigration authority. So the reality is mixed. There is clear evidence that on occasion, and this is very rare, there are unlawful stops or profiling in some cases, and there have been associated class action suits. But those cases, again, like I said, they represent a small subset of their overall activities. And courts generally have not held that the agency as a whole operates outside the law. Instead, what they do is they force policy changes and indicate that specific conduct may have crossed legal lines in certain situations. So this is not a widespread issue. And if you go back to our previous podcast where we talked about ICE in general, you can see about all the evil that they have prevented from happening by some of the operations that they do, by removing very violent gangs and people who are sexual offenders, etc. So we have to put this within context and understand our rights.
Yeah, excellent point, right? And so if you're listening to this and you're terrified, it's important to rewind, listen to this again. If you're listening to this and you don't know what me and Biju look like, we both look like we could be illegal immigrants, right? And so we should probably read this section a little more carefully. But, I'm not worried about this, and we'll talk through this more about this in the podcast. But to reiterate what Biju said, because someone out there is tense and they're telling their grandmother to carry their passport to ShopRite and not to get out of the car and to be careful. Can I stop your car? Two important points, or a few important points. ICE generally cannot stop your car based on a traffic violation alone. Federal immigration agents don't have the same authority as local police to pull over someone just for a broken taillight. They must have specific, articulate reason, reasonable suspicion that someone is in violation of immigration law before stopping a vehicle. Now, as Biju mentioned, ICE can stop a vehicle if they have probable cause, right, or reasonable suspicion. In practice, ICE sometimes stops vehicles when they know that they are targeting someone for enforcement. For example, they know that someone's in violation of immigration law, and they know for certain that's a person that could be detained. Now, this varies along the U.S. border. Within the first 100 miles of the border, federal immigration agencies sometimes have broader powers related to stops and searches, but the Fourth Amendment protections still apply. Now, ICE's actions are governed by law. The scope of what an immigration officer is governed by U.S. statutory law. U.S. Code 8, Section 1357 is the actual federal law that defines the enforcement powers of immigration officers, including when they can arrest someone or question someone about their status. Again, you can go online and read this, right? This is useful because it's not just agency policy, it's the actual law, U.S. Code 8, Section 1357. So important. Go and read that yourself. But there's also agency law, right? You can go to ice.gov and read through some of the questions they ask. ICE does not need a judicial warrant to make arrests. Like other law enforcement officers, ICE officers and agents can initiate consensual encounters and speak with people, briefly detain aliens when they have reasonable suspicion that the aliens are illegally present in the United States, and arrest people they believe are illegal aliens. And so all aliens who violate U.S. immigration law, they're subject to arrest and detention, regardless of their criminal history. In terms of these administrative warrants that ICE issues, ICE issues two types of civil administrative warrants, Form I-200 warrants ICE to arrest people suspected of violating immigration law. 205 warrants ICE to remove aliens with final orders of removal from the United States. Important to know that ICE does not need a judge to issue the I-205 warrants. Trained, authorized immigration officers can issue them. Here's the point to remember. Everyone ICE arrests receives due process, right? That's law, right? You get due process. You have a chance to appeal and present your paperwork. So it's not like you're snatched up in a van and thrown into a jail and shipped to like Guatemala somewhere, right? There is due process involved. So I would also encourage people not only to read the U.S. statutory law, right, Section 8 of the U.S. Code, not only to read ICE.gov, but many people have Know Your Rights guides. These are trusted legal sources about your rights in confronting an ICE officer or an agent. For example, can an ICE officer enter your home? The National Immigrant Justice Center, they have a lot of great questions and things you can read through if you're scared. If an officer knocks on your door in your private space, officers must have a warrant signed by a judge to enter your home, not just a personal ICE warrant that's signed by an immigration officer. So it's important to understand that within private spaces, right, they need an actual judicial warrant to enter that private space. And so if you're sitting at home and wondering, can someone like snatch you off your couch, right? There has to be much more paperwork involved and more of a process through an actual court for you to be apprehended. So important to understand your rights there. Encourage you to look at these resources. A lot of great things online that you could study and research before you jump to conclusions on what the media is actually presenting to you. But if we look at the broader picture and we think through ICE enforcement and deportations through the decades, how have these numbers changed under Bush and Obama, under Biden, and then under Trump?
Great question. And I should admit that this took me some time to get together, and I was a little surprised by some of the things I learned. So let me kick off actually with some definitions. So when we think about ICE enforcements, it's good to think of a broad umbrella of what I would call repatriation, which contains three subsets: removals, returns, and expulsions. These are the three subsets of repatriation. Repatriation is removing somebody. And then apart from repatriation, there is self-deportation, which is voluntary. So there's involuntary and voluntary. There are two categories. So in the involuntary one, which is repatriation, removal is the formal deportation under immigration law, which is Title 8, which usually happens with a removal order and legal consequences for re-entry. The second type of repatriation is returns, which means sending someone back without a formal removal order, which includes voluntary returns, withdrawal of the admission applications, or any other administrative or enforcement returns. The third one is expulsion, which is specifically a rapid turnaround, turn back, and it happens under Title 42, which was a COVID-era border rule, and it lasted between 2020 and 2023. This is outside of the normal asylum Title 8 process. It's distinct, but functionally, it's basically a fast removal. And the Title 42 is on the grounds of public health. So there was a public health emergency. We couldn't let people come in and exacerbate the problem that we were having here. So that's why they were turned back. So these are the three categories. And so when you think about deportations, you have to think through this holistically. And I'm going to go through that one by one. One note is that the voluntary self-deportations is a very hard number to find. And so we're probably going to have to skip over the numbers for that because I couldn't find anything reliable that I can report on. So I'll just stick to repatriations. And just for sake of context, I will start with President Clinton. So I'm going all the way back. Clinton, remember, is 1993 to 2000, right? Then we have President Bush from 2001, 2008. 2008, President Obama starts. Then in 2017, Donald Trump starts. And then we have Biden and then Trump part 2. So this is how we're going to go to the numbers, because otherwise it's going to be very meaty if I go one segment by segment. So let me start off with total repatriations, total removals, right? The grand total. Under Clinton, in the 8 years, we had 12.3 million removals, okay? That's 1.5 million repatriations per year. Compared that to George Bush, 10.3 million repatriations. So 12.3 Clinton, 10.3 Bush, so it's coming down. Barack Obama, 3.6 million. So it's coming down further, a lot further. Donald Trump, term 1, 1.4 million. So it pales in comparison, even though he only had 4 years. Then under Biden, now here's a little shocker. Under Joe Biden, it was 3.5 million repatriations, because that includes the 2.4 million people who were expelled under Title 42 on the border itself. So the numbers for Joe Biden are actually substantially higher than even Donald Trump. Not only Donald Trump, even Barack Obama, surprisingly. And then you come to Donald Trump part 2, which is very, very early to get the grand totals, but he had about 500,000 repatriations in 2025 alone. So he is on track to get to a big number. But in terms of just sheer totals, you can see how aggressive the Democrat, like you can see the Democratic presidents versus Republican presidents. There isn't much of a difference. Ultimately, they all want to enforce the law and make sure that our citizens are safe. If you were to zoom into just the removals, these are the official deportation numbers. Let's go to that again. Just now we're going to zoom into removals. Under President Clinton, it was 900,000. Under George Bush, it was 2 million removals. Under Barack Obama, it was 3.1 million removals. Okay, that is the highest. And under Donald Trump, in spite of his rhetoric, it was less than 1 million removals in the 4 years. And then under Joe Biden, it was only 500,000 removals. So he was, in terms of pure removals, in a lower count. And that's why when people think about removals, they think about President Biden as having a low number. But in total, his numbers were substantially higher than Donald Trump. So I won't throw any more numbers just because it's a lot. So what I want our listeners to understand is that there's a difference between the different types of repatriation. You can see that Presidents Bush and Clinton, their raw enforcement figures are much larger than just the removal figures alone suggest for recent presidents. And just if you zoom into removals, you can see that President Obama's years actually stand out as having the most number of formal removals than any president in recent history. That's why it earned him the distinct title of deporter-in-chief, which I don't think a lot of people even know. Even though he did, towards the latter years, he narrowed his priorities to focus only on recent arrivals and people with serious crime records. So all these presidents tweak their priorities as time goes on, and they are always watching what is going on in the country, because ultimately they feel the responsibility to make sure that their country is safe. It doesn't matter whether they say it out aloud or not. And again, you can see that President Trump's first term, by contrast, produced fewer number of deportations overall, but he did broaden the targets. Like any undocumented person, regardless of community ties, became a fair game of enrollment. And so interior arrests in courthouses and et cetera, they rose up during his time. When President Biden took over, he initially tried to pause most of the deportations and had stricter priorities, which interestingly, some of the courts actually blocked some of the things that he was trying to do. So President Biden's early numbers through his years were low, but then it started sharply rising towards the end of his presidency, which is again interesting. His numbers in 2024, they actually were almost similar to President Trump's peak numbers during his time. So it's just interesting how overall sentimental, like how people think about what is happening versus what is really happening, there is a pretty big reality gap there. We'll definitely note over here that President Trump's second administration is definitely operating on a different scale. Like Congress has explicitly approved a large supplemental package that is combined with their base funding as intended to support a target. They say of 1 million deportations per year, and they are also rapidly expanding the detention capacity. Now, I'm not 100% sure when you say 1 million, are you talking about removals? Are you talking repatriations? And my guess is ultimately they'll make the definitions fit the numbers. But that's a big target if it's only removals, because that's not happened. That's not that easy to accomplish. So it'll be interesting to see how they are able to kind of hit the target and get those numbers going. But there is due process happening, right? There's court backlogs. There are practical limits to what you can do in terms of arrests and transportation. This is not logistically easy to do. So it will be interesting to see what he does. One thing is clear. A lot of the rhetoric has caused illegal crossings across the southern border to dramatically go down. And so a lot of the benefits we see in terms of illegal entry is a function of the rhetoric, even though from the numbers, what I see is it's more rhetoric than actual numbers.
Yeah, excellent analysis, right? And as you alluded to, right, there was essentially an open border policy during the Biden-Harris administration. Through June 2024, they had 8.2 million more encounters of illegal aliens at the border than the entire Trump administration before that. And what's interesting too is that many people think, well, deportation just started under Trump. Like this is something he initiated when he started in office. As you mentioned with these amazing stats, this has been US policy for decades upon decades with various presidents. But the issue what's happening in the news and what's capturing, I think, a lot of national spotlight is the number of incidents where a violent encounter is resulted in death. And so if we take the microscope and look at this particular area of ICE immigration officer encountering perhaps a protester or someone resisting arrest, how many people has ICE killed in the process of attempting to deport someone? And how has this changed under different presidencies?
So it's important to remember here that the data on ICE-related deaths is we are zooming in on in custody fatalities. So this is more due to medical issues, suicide, homicide, during detention, etc., etc. We don't have a lot of documentation during the arrests or deportations happening. Of course, we have the big flash news that is happening in Minneapolis, but outside of those kind of things, it's really hard to get numbers. So comprehensive figures are incomplete due to these things, but we have sources like the DHS reports, the ACLU analysis, and some compilations like that that helps us with just at least getting a sense of what's going on. Again, like I said, it excludes border deaths under CBP. We're talking purely about ICE at this point here. So under President Bush, which again is, remember, it's not the full 8 years because ICE was only established partway into his first term, so it's 6 years. Roughly about 50 to 60 custody deaths. And then under President Obama, roughly about 80 to 90 custody deaths in the 8 years. Under President Biden, we're talking about 40, 50-ish, something around there, deaths. And under Trump, on 30 to 40 deaths. For the most part, I would say like it kind of tracks, even though President Obama's numbers seem a little high. But again, you remember like different policies, reporting, all that stuff. We do not know the variations going on here. But I would put it all within the same bracket in that at least President Trump's, because that's the analysis we're doing, right? President Trump's first administration was in line with, I would say, the previous administration starting Bush. However, there is a difference in the second term. From what we see, we already have about 30 or so deaths happening in 2025, and then we have single digits, maybe around 6 or so deaths in 2026. So that is a surge for sure, because on average, it was, when we talk about averages on previous presidents, we're talking about 7 to 10 per year. But in the last year alone, we're talking about 30-ish. So that is definitely an increase. So I would say so overall, right, in addition to in custody deaths, there are fatality that happens during ICE operations that we don't have and we do not know. Bottom line, deaths in ICE custody have climbed in Trump administration part 2, not part 1. Independent analysis and reviews have found that there are preventable deaths that are related to like medical neglect or poor conditions during the detention. And this is across presidencies, by the way. We're not talking about President Trump at this point. And there are also lethal force incidents. Of course, we have the flash news happening with Minneapolis, but these type of lethal force enforcements, they become the trigger to have more comprehensive discussions on immigration enforcement and rules of engagement. So it is unfortunate. We should never have anyone die, right? But at the very least, we should take this as an opportunity to engage in fruitful, meaningful conversation and set apart the rhetoric and too much emotional engagements.
Yeah, excellent breakdown. And as you mentioned, it's difficult to track these statistics accurately because no one sits there with a pen and paper and counts, well, how many people died trying to be arrested and how many people died in prison because of neglect. And so it's difficult, right, to really place these numbers in a good statistical range of the whole context of immigration. But what is sad, right, is what's happening in Minneapolis, You have people, sadly, that have died. It put this in context. Many Americans do support the deportation of people that are here illegally. But 70% of independents think that there has been overreach now, where this has gone too far in terms of how deportation is being handled. And so, sadly, we have the deaths of Alex Preddy, Renee Nicole Good. It's sad whether you're a conservative or you're on the left, right? You should always mourn death, right? You shouldn't take this lightly. But who's at fault here? Because right now there's a lot of finger pointing. The other side blames the other side. What's the role of the city, the state, and federal officials to ensure that laws are followed and citizens are safe? Why is this important? And this has obviously been the scope of a lot of national attention almost every day for the last several months. And so if we take a microscope and zoom in here, what's happening?
So public reporting so far, so one of the caveats I'm going to make sure to mention is that this is an ongoing situation. So what we say is going to be just based on the information we know right now. So public reporting so far indicates that an ICE agent in Minneapolis shot and killed Miss Good during an enforcement operation in early January 2026. And more recently, Mr. Preddy. This was happened during their operation and when they were going to detain immigration violators. So this was during an operation that this happened. The federal government has acknowledged, especially the incident with Miss Good, as an ICE use of force event, but they have not released many operational details because it's still pending internal and external investigations. So investigation is ongoing. Fault at this point of time is contested. Protesters and locals blame ISIS aggressive tactics, for example, warrantless entries, force being used within the crowds, while officials cite armed resistance and interference in their operations. Governor Walz has called for agent withdrawal, labeling it as an occupation, but ultimately investigations are still ongoing. When we look at an assessment and an analysis, right, there are different layers. There is individual responsibility, whether the agent's use of deadly force was legally justified, and that will be determined by facts like perceived threat, weapons, presence of weapons, warnings, adherence to ISIS's own use of force policy. Again, this is by being investigated by DHS oversight bodies and potentially by DOJ's Civil Rights Division. The second layer is the institutional responsibility. So if patterns emerge, such as inadequate training, aggressive tactical planning, or permissive rules of engagement, then the faults will shift from a single agent towards ICE leadership and DHS officials who designed the system or tolerated the practices, either one. And then the third layer is the political responsibility, right? The broader decision to ramp up raids, expand detention, loosen guardrails of enforcement lies with the current executive branch, which is the Trump administration, and the legislative branch, Congress, which actually funded the expansion. So it's not just Trump. So there is and the secondary aspect to the political responsibility is that when we think about political responsibility, it's not just the federal government, there's a state government, there's a local government, there is a role of Governor Walz and the mayor of the city. They all have a part to play to make sure that things are happening smoothly and the risk is minimized in any of these operations. So when we think about roles, like I said, there's a federal role, which is ICE and DHS. They are the ones who are enforcing the immigration laws. Then there is a state role, like Governor Walz, the AG of the state. They oversee the local safety, and they can sue. They have the authority to sue for overreach. For example, there was a lawsuit they filed in January 12th around the operation. And then there is the city officials, the Minneapolis PD, who handles public order. They are the ones who are coordinating via fusion centers and making sure that the laws are followed, right? The caveat is like policies like the sanctuary city policy kind of complicate these rules and blur the lines and makes more friction than necessary. The idea of having these different roles, like, federal, state, local, it's meant to balance out the power between federal, state, and local officials. And it balances, and then it kind of gives a balance to immigration enforcement and ensures that civil rights is also adhered to. If you think about the clashes that happened in the 1950s on the desegregation, this is very similar. There were a lot of clashes that happened. But one thing to remember is that if these escalations continue to happen, it does risk broader unrest. And the president administration can invoke the Insurrection Act. And if that happens, that will be unfortunate, and it'll further undermine trust in our institutions, which we do not want to do, because already the public doesn't trust their government. So we do not want to add fuel to that fire. So in summary, right, I would encourage our audience to not jump to conclusions. Regardless of the short video clips you watch or the sound bites that you hear, remember that all these things only provide an incomplete picture of the entirety of the story. You need to hear all sides. So let's give due process its rightful chance to mature. And then once we have gathered all the facts, we can then accurately understand what happened, how it happened, and determine the next best course of action.
Yeah, excellent things to think about there. There's so many layers of this, as you mentioned. And if I want to take away the microscope here and just look at this from a broad national perspective, you look at 2026, immigration agents have only shot at 4 people despite carrying thousands of operations nationwide. One was armed with a handgun, one was armed with a shovel, 2 weaponized their vehicles. But for someone that was peacefully protesting on the side of a road, right, no one has been shot. So it's important to look at these events in context and say, what's happening around the whole country? And why are these events happening in Minnesota? There's also, as Biju mentioned, number 2, a challenge with sanctuary cities. For example, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia, Arizona, they've had more ICE arrests than Minnesota. But the difference is they've cooperated with federal law for the most part. These violent confrontations are rare in states and cities where local officials cooperate with law enforcement. Now, if you look at this statistically, the U.S. has about 3,144 counties. There are about nine non-cooperating counties where you have sanctuary cities. You've had 110 violent confrontations in those counties. In the other 3,134 counties in the United States, this is almost the rest of the country, you've had less than those 9 non-cooperating counties. You've only had 64 violent confrontations. So what does this mean? You're 590 times more likely to have a violent confrontation in these sanctuary cities. And a big part of the reason is because of the non-cooperation or the non-enforcement of local police due to their officials. Again, you can run these stats in different ways. You can look at like Chicago versus Los Angeles versus Minneapolis. For example, Chicago has a population of 2.7 million. They've had 28 violent confrontations. LA, population of 3.8 million, 25 violent confrontations. Minneapolis, fraction of those population in those bigger cities, only a population of about 428,000, yet they've had just the same amount, approximately the same amount of violent confrontations. They've had 21 in that city. And so as the smallest population of those 3 cities, the rate or the chance of being in a violent confrontation escalates between 600 and 900%. And so we need to look at the policies of sanctuary cities and also ask, how is this contributing, right, to these um, sad outcomes that we've seen with Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good? But looking at Alex Preddy, right, his intentions seem noble. He was a nurse, right? He lived 1 block away from where this confrontation happened. A neighbor said that he was part of a Signal ICE group chat, which is used to rapidly respond and report to parts of ICE agents in the area. Now, multiple media sources are saying this. Just a week earlier, Alex Pretty had a physical altercation with ICE and broke his rib. Just a week before his tragic death. He was tackled for impeding operations. Then a week later, he shows up with a loaded weapon to interfere, stop federal law enforcement. So he's had this history of interfering with ICE, whereas the media is painting this picture of this great Samaritan. Again, his intentions may have been good, but if you arm yourself, entangle yourself between federal agents, and you continue to refuse arrest or submit even after being pepper sprayed, it doesn't matter like the angle of your gun and where it was and who touched your gun first. You're really setting yourself up in a really bad position here. And so, we'll talk about this a little more, but Alex was in a position that he shouldn't have been. As noble as his intentions may have been, there are many people on the left who advocate for immigration rights, who advocate against ICE, that say that in this type of situation, you should not interfere with the federal agent. You should stay on the sideline, peacefully protest, but never entangle yourself in a physical altercation like we saw in the video between Alex and this ICE agent. On the flip side, I will say this. This is my other point. I saw the video of Alex being shot, and it's horrific, right? I think law enforcement also has a responsibility to pursue de-escalation. Many of these ICE agents that are being trained and put into these highly volatile situations have only a few weeks or months of training. And so I think in cases where local law enforcement doesn't cooperate, ICE agents need to be trained to de-escalate better. I think the onus falls on them. Obviously, they used pepper spray in the case of Alex Pretty, but my question is, before being shot in the head, could you have used a taser, right? Could you have shot the guy like in the knee or the legs? Again, I do understand the perspective of ICE here. There's a gun. Alex has a gun. Is in the middle of this confrontation. They don't know if he's going to shoot or not. I think what they did not break any law per se, but was it ethical? I don't think so, right? I think there could be much more de-escalation done, especially at the point of physical touch. If you know someone is about to wrestle you, touch you, jump on someone that you're about to arrest, I think that's where maybe the taser comes out as opposed to like a loaded gun to someone's head. And so as much as we want to look at Alex and say, hey, you're dumb, you shouldn't have done this, we also need to ask the hard question, could this have de-escalated better? I also do want to address, you look at the media, right? And everyone's looking at Minneapolis now, but there's also so much selective outrage here because no one called for the mass arrests in streets when Lake and Hope Riley, who was a nursing student, she was savagely beaten, she was raped, tortured, strangled, literally had her head bashed in a rock with an illegal alien. For example, no one called for deportation or mass protests when a mother of 5, her name is Rachel Morin, right? She was strangled. Her head was beaten into a rock. She was sexually assaulted. Many people know about Dakara Thompson, an illegal alien sexually assaulted her and then threw her literally over a bridge. And so I think there's a lot of selective outrage here. If we're going to mourn Alex Pretty, which we should, if we're going to mourn Renee Nicole Good, which we should also look at a lot of these victims of criminal illegal aliens and have the same type of compassion. So in looking at Minneapolis and Minnesota, I do want to take the microscope and look at the circumstances of each situation, but I also want to take a telescope and take a step back and say, what's happening in the broader picture of immigration. Nonetheless, we know that these protests have erupted all around the country. People are really upset. ICE is on the mind of a lot of people because it's up in front in many of the media outlets and many stories and shows that we're watching. But speaking to the actual protests, right? Are these really organic? Are they really grassroots? Is there more to these protests than meets the eye here?
When looking at the various protests and how they have come up and been organized, it suggests that they are not purely organic. There is some level of coordination and funding by certain groups and unions like the SEIU and nonprofits. Their primary purpose is to amplify the grassroots anger over ICE tactics. So spontaneous elements of fear, anger, rage exist and they're fearful, but the structure that is by which it's being conducted, like the January 23rd strike that happened, it clearly points to a good level of planning happening as well. So that's what the perception is. In terms of how we can avoid these kind of situations, right? When protests like this turn dangerous, there tends to be like several factors either happening alone or in combination. Aggressive policing tactics, poorly planned crowd control, small groups willing to escalate, and then volatile information environments where rumors of what officers or protesters have done travel faster than facts that can be verified. So these are some of the elements that contribute to it. In terms of what protesters can do to avoid getting hurt, right? They should understand the importance of peaceful assembly, which is ordained under the First Amendment. Absolutely no confrontation with federal agents when they're executing operations, which, by the way, are mostly dangerous situations where they fear for their own lives. So they're risking their life to ensure that our streets are clean and everybody's abiding by the law. And the parallel that I would say is, how would we behave if we were pulled over for speeding or DUI or whatever? Do you fight? Do you use aggressive tactics? It won't end well. So you use common sense as you think through those kind of things. Do not interfere with federal operations. From From an ICE agent perspective, they should focus on de-escalating, right? Are there policies, better policies they can use for de-escalation? They can have liaison officers who communicate with organizers and with the local authorities. And they can also have more stricter rules about using less lethal weapons, which you mentioned. And like tasers, they can dramatically reduce injuries and chaos. I will, the only caveat I will say, like, this I know is a great suggestion, but remember, people are making split-second decisions. They see couple of actions and behaviors by anybody who's being unruly, and they have to make a call. They cannot sit and analyze like we can and do a frame by frame analysis of what is going on. They have to make a quick decision. It's life or death. And remember, they're in a high stress environment, but they have to make a call quickly and move, right? Another thing that can be done to avoid situations like this is local officials should cooperate with federal agents when they are doing lawful activities. So they can help by ensuring the protests are peaceful, rapidly correcting misinformation, like alleged shootings or things that did not happen. They can immediately correct that misinformation. And they can also provide independent oversight of any force that is used on demonstrators. So they feel like their complaints are not just vanishing away, right? So they're being taken seriously as well. Now, in terms of the organizers, people who organize the protests, I'm not saying that they are all evil or anything, right? That's fine. You can definitely organize protests, and there's a time and place absolutely for doing that. But set internal norms against property destructions, against confrontations. By the way, these are all even shown in the ACLU guidelines themselves. And you also need to have a way to coordinate with the state and local officials so that you guys are all working in tandem. Work with the legal observers and medics also to keep the demonstrations focused and as safe as possible. Make sure that you prioritize safety. And if everybody were to work in coordination for an ultimate good ending, we wouldn't have situations like this where we have unfortunate injuries or deaths.
Yeah, excellent point. And I think protests are good for the country, right? It sounds crazy. I'm a moderate right Republican most of the time. But my kids don't clean their dinner table until someone comes and actually looks and examines with a careful eye. And I think a strong country is defined by a strong right and a strong left. And so I think these protests are healthy. I don't necessarily agree with the fundamental premise of them, but I think they're healthy. In terms of if they're organic, no, I don't think they're fully organic. In fact, I think they're, as you mentioned, they're really being funded, especially by foreign donors and well planned with very strategic calculation. I'm going to read something that I read on Twitter. It's from Eric Schwalm. This has been retweeted many times, but he's a special forces warrant officer who has experience in counterinsurgency ops. So I'll read this to you. He says this: as a former special forces warrant officer with multiple rotations running counterinsurgency ops, both hunting insurgents and trying to separate them from sympathetic populations, I've seen organized resistance up close. From Enbar to Helmand, the pattern is familiar. Spotters, cutouts, dead drops or modern equivalents, disciplined communications, role specialization, and a willingness to absorb casualties while bleeding the stronger force slowly. What's unfolding in Minneapolis right now isn't protests. It's low-level insurgency infrastructure built by people who've clearly studied the playbook. Signal groups, signals an app, signal groups at 1,000 member cap per zone, dedicated roles, mobile chasers, plate checkers, logging vehicle data into shared databases, 24/7 dispatch nodes vectoring assets, salute-style reporting, size, activity, location, unit time equipment, unsuspected federal vehicles, daily chat rotations, and time deletions to frustrate forensic recovery, vetting processes for new joiners, mutual aid from sympathetic locals, teachers providing cover, possible police department tip-offs on license plate hookups, home-based coordination points, rapid escalation from observation to physical obstruction, or worse. He says this isn't spontaneous outrage. This is command and control with redundancy, OPSEC hygiene, and task organization that would make a SF team sergeant nod in recognition, Special Forces team. Replace ICE agents with occupying coalition forces, and the structure maps almost one-to-one to early-stage urban cells we hunted in the mid-2000s. The most sobering part, he says, it's domestic, funded, trained somewhere, and directed by people who live in the same country they're trying to paralyze law enforcement in. When your own citizens build and operate this level of parallel intelligence and rapid response network against federal officers, complete with doxing, vehicle pursuits, and harassment, that's already turned lethal. You're no longer dealing with civil disobedience. You're facing a distributed resistance that's learned the lessons of successful insurgencies. Stay below the kinetic threshold most of the time, force overreaction when possible, maintain popular support through narrative, and never present a single center of gravity. I spent years training partner forces to dismantle exactly this kind of apparatus. Now, pieces of it are standing up in American cities, enabled by elements of local government and civil society that should keep every American awake at night. Not because I want escalation, but because history shows these things don't de escalate on their own once the infrastructure exists and the cadre believe they're winning the information war. We either recognize what we're actually looking at, or we pretend it's still just activism until the structures harden and spread. You call America, but from where I sit, this isn't January 2026 politics anymore. It's phase one of something we spent decades trying to keep off our own soil. Now, to add on to that, the FBI, the last 48 hours, has taken an active role in what they're calling Signalgate. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed the Bureau has opened up an investigation into Signal group chats exposed by independent journalist Cam Higby. We look at all the stuff. As soon as Higby put that post out, I opened an investigation of it. He says this sort of Signal chat being coordinated with individuals locally in Minnesota, but maybe even around the country, if that leads to a break in the federal statute or violation of some law, we are going to arrest some people. And so important to think about, if you don't agree with us, if you say, oh, this is just a fantasy, historical like dream we're talking about here, you keep an open mind to it. It's very coordinated, right? You can read through how some of these signal groups are working. There's much more intelligence and coordination and operation behind this than just like John Doe who works a 9 to 5 and is coming home and thinking of how to plan his next protest. There is a lot going on behind how these protests are being organized. I'll even add, especially on a midterm election year, this seems like it could be a tool the left is using to swing an election. You mentioned, how do we avoid situations where protesters get hurt? I'll kind of add on to this. The National Immigration Justice Center, which essentially is anti-ICE, they say this: stay calm and don't run, argue, resist, or fight the officer. I'll read that again. The National Immigrant Justice Center, right? They are opposed to ICE and their own guidelines for immigration justice. It's called Know Your Rights with an ICE encounter. They say stay calm, don't run, argue, resist, or fight the officer. Even if you believe your rights are being violated or you are being treated unfairly. Keep your hands where police can see them and tell them if you need to reach into a glove compartment or for a wallet to show your papers. The Attorney General's Office of the state of Washington also has a guide, Know Your Civil Rights Immigration Enforcement Laws. They detail what to do if an immigration enforcement officer approaches very similar things they're advocating for, like stay calm, don't tackle, don't jump on someone, especially with a loaded weapon, don't argue, don't resist, don't fight. And so you look at a lot of these situations we're seeing blasted on TV, right? These protesters are, in my opinion, entangled way too close to a very volatile situation. And sadly, the lives have been taken in this process. And it's something we should mourn, right? It's not something we celebrate. We don't say, haha, you big dummy. It's sad, right? And we should draw attention to this. But the nation is divided, right? Both sides are looking at each other and calling each other all types of vitriolic names. The tension is high. How can people look at the same side of a same set of facts and come to two different viewpoints? I mean, we all see the same videos, we all read the same stories, but you have two very different opposing views that are taking hold between the right and the left. And this happens, right? Not just with Minneapolis, but seemingly with every major national story, right? You have just so much division over the same set of facts. Why does this happen? So one of the reasons this happens, I think you look carefully at the world and you see a lot of division. Morality is often driven far more by intuition and emotion than by deliberate reasoning. And one of the books I think is really good to read, it's a book by Jonathan Haidt in 2012. It's called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And one of his basic premises is essentially that when it comes to society and when it comes to how good people view important events in society like this, right? Our lived experiences, our trauma, the things that we experience in life shape our perspectives and our reasoning much more than we even imagine. And these things affect our perceptions of news, they affect our perceptions of objective decision making, they affect our perceptions of major decisions that we make in life. For example, I'll give this analogy. Imagine there's a race of purple unicorns. right? I pick unicorns because my daughter loves unicorns. But imagine there's a race of purple unicorns and there's 1,000 of them. 10 of them are horrible. So you got 1,000 unicorns, 10 are horrible, 990 of them are great. Now, growing up, hypothetically, you grew up with 9 out of 10 of those horrible purple unicorns, right? These unicorns, they robbed your house, they assaulted family members, they vandalized your car for 15 years throughout your whole childhood. And now you grow up and now you're surrounded by 990 amazing purple unicorns. Will you be completely objective and fair in your assessment of these unicorns? Will you trust them? Will you unconditionally obey them? Believe it or not, as rational as you think you are, as objective as you think you are, or how smart you think you are, because of those shared experiences that have shaped your life, you are not going to be objective. In fact, you're going to be driven far more by your own emotion and intuition and subjective reasoning than objective reasoning. And so it's important to understand when you're a Republican, you're looking at someone that's Democrat, or you're a Democrat and you're looking at someone that's Republican. Before calling them crazy and nuts and uninformed, it's essential to understand that lived experiences, hardship, and trauma often shape individuals before resulting to political hostility or labeling someone as enemies. Political disagreement should never precede an honest effort to understand the experiences, the suffering, and trauma that really shape another person's worldview. And so important to understand how people from two different worldviews can look at the same situation and come to different conclusions. Any thoughts on that?
I think you nailed it, right? So I think it's very important for people to understand and appreciate that fact because everybody has a worldview. And think of a worldview as glasses that you're wearing, right? So everybody has one, or the lens of your eye. So, and that worldview is so if you think about lens, right? If I'm wearing a pink shaded lens versus a yellow shaded lens versus a blue shaded lens, what I see and the colors I see are different based on the lens I'm wearing. In the same way, different people are shaped by the views that you were just saying, based on their childhood, their experiences, etc., etc. And they bring those worldviews to whatever is in front of them. Every day, when you deal with your children or your spouse or your friend or your colleague or your manager, you bring your worldview along with you. And your worldview combined with the experiences, right? So if you had a trauma, and it could be a light trauma, but you had a lot of experience growing up where people made fun of you as being fat or bulky or whatever, you get older and somebody makes a joke. Like it may roll over my shoulder because I didn't have a problem with it, but somebody else who had that experience is struck and impacted by that innocent joke that person made. The person did not intend to hurt the recipient, but they get hurt anyway. This is what it means, right? This is what it means that these experiences and the worldview could be, and by the way, worldview is more broader than experiences. So it's like an atheistic worldview, one where you say there is no God. There is a theistic worldview where there is a God. And then within that, there is the God of the Bible, right? The Jesus who talks about love and compassion and mercy. And if there is another God that somebody believes that is more strict and fearsome and something to fear, your worldview determines how you see things and how you come to your conclusions. So it is the point that we are trying to make here is that be aware of the worldview so you can appreciate and empathize with somebody else's worldview, even when they don't align exactly with your thought process. Also understand that different people have different ways of thinking. There are logical thinkers, there are people who think mostly based on how they feel. Nothing wrong with that, because there are places where your feelings should actually bring forth the outcome that you want versus just having a logical mindset. So be ready to empathize and be ready. We have to have an openness of mind to be proven wrong, that sometimes what I'm seeing is not correct, that have the humility to change, to concede if you have not seen all the facts together. I think humility is very important, to understand that no matter how much you know, you don't know everything. Once you understand that, it kind of gets you to a point where you can start empathizing more, listening more, understanding facts more. And remember, when people give you facts, think they're they're bubbling up the facts that they consider important. There are other facts that they didn't tell you, not necessarily because they're being deceptive, but they didn't feel that's important. But you talk to another person, the counterfacts come true. And so be aware, be humble, be always on the lookout to understand facts with an open mind and a willingness to change your point of view.
Yeah, excellent. And that's so hard, right? It's hard to be humble. It's hard to examine your own worldview and to say, I'm going to be open. Now, does traditional media help this? Is traditional media a good source of information? Does it just fuel outrage, or is it legitimately a good source to use to enhance your own worldview?
Like traditional media, like if we were to just zoom in on immigration in general or ICE specifically, right? It's got a mixed record. Major outlets break important news stories on deaths in custody, filthy, overcrowded facilities, policy shifts that are expanding or limiting enforcement. They're getting the information mostly through like the Freedom of Information Act, which is fantastic that they're getting all these documents, information. But the problem is they have a specific agenda and a view that they will want to put forth. So the other thing to understand is like they bring their whole economy, the media economy is fueled by people having strong feelings. So they have scorecards, who deported more, sensational images of children in cages, right? And they can obscure your thinking process. There are outlets and part-time shows, like part-time TV shows, that will frame ICE as completely like they are heroic defenders of our borders and our cities. Or the other side will say they're a rogue army of mass terrorists that are terrorizing immigrants and people, our neighbors. So it's like there is no context, there's no space for like a nuanced framing of what's going on. And especially when some tragedies happen, it's so sad to see how quickly people jump. It's like a vulture. They just jump on it and pick apart the pieces that they think is best to show the outside world, right? And because it's driven by audience attention and advertising money, it rewards like emotional engagement. So where a careful reporting would have given proper information, that doesn't, unfortunately, in today's world, it doesn't result in audience engagement. People want to be stimulated. So when stimulation is what you're looking for, stimulation is what you'll get. So the answer to your question, bottom line, yes. Much of the traditional media, as a general rule, fuels outrage.
Yeah, excellent points, right? And people that watch the news think that they have done all they can to be educated. Like, hey, I watched the world news tonight for 10 minutes. Now I'm smart. Or I read the headlines to the Wall Street Journal or Newsweek, and now I'm informed about the world. But the reality is that you mentioned the economic incentives of traditional media favor outrage. Sensationalism drives attention, attention drives viewership, viewership drives advertising revenue. That's the way it works. As a result, coverage in journalism is often shaped less by good unbiased information and more by what maximizes engagement and profit. So important to understand, you're watching a show, it's someone else's source of revenue. They want you hooked, they want you attached, they want you outraged so that they can increase their ad revenue numbers and they can make a profit off of your engagement. And so the role of a Christian is to understand that essentially this source of information that you're receiving needs to be filtered out. They need to really look beyond this and critically analyze what exactly I'm watching. But how does this play with social media? Many on social media have dangerous, vitriolic views of the other side. Taking this a step further, have we lost our ability to have civil conversations in society?
Social media has an amplified impact. It's both an organizing tool as well as an instrument for dangerous misinformation. Activists use it to publicize raids in real time, direct legal aids, donations, and also, on the bright side, document abuses that might otherwise be invisible, right? It helps with transparency on one side, which is really, really, really good. But the same platforms are flooded with clips, often edited without context. Sometimes they're doctored images, and they have incendiary narratives that portray that the opponents are existential threats, right? Whether that means portraying immigrants as an invasion or depicting the agents as neo-Nazis. It's extremes, right? And again, it's back to our point of like, how do you get people to be enraged, to be emotional, and to keep clicking on the contents? So this dynamic, it accelerates and becomes a spiral of dehumanization on both sides. And to make things worse, algorithms on these social media platforms are engineered to maximize engagement and surface posts that generate these strong emotions of anger, fear, and contempt, and then suppresses nuanced analysis that does not like provoke immediate reaction and helps you to bring about a more informed judgment. Because of that, right? And because what you click on informs what you see next, which then informs what you see the one after that. That's why it's called a spiral. You're in quicksand. Everybody who is clicking through different videos and clips should understand you are walking on quicksand if you do not diversify the different type of content you click on. And so what ends up happening is users end up most enraged, right, on immigration. They are ones who are the most enraged are often the ones who are exposed to the most extreme content on both sides. And over time, this environment, which is toxic, completely erodes the perceived legitimacy of civil discourse and disagreement, which is what you were talking about. Can we have a discussion? Yeah. But if the other side is constantly depicted as evil or worse still, malicious, how do you compromise? Because when you compromise with evil or somebody who's malicious, it feels like a betrayal, the rightful democratic practice. So I would say overall, we haven't completely lost the ability to have civil conversations like yet, but it's becoming harder and harder because the digital platforms keep rewarding those who treat these type of politics and events like combat zones. It's like we are at war instead of trying to understand, investigate, and problem solve. Some of the most fruitful and healthy conversations that you now have often occur in small, moderated communities that intentionally are setting together and enforcing norms of respect. A good example is the platform we have where we are talking. We are forcing ourselves to go and look at every side of the story before reporting back out, knowing well that we have a worldview we bring to this, right? So that's my thought on that question.
Yeah, I love the analogy of quicksand. And I think, before you jump into the quicksand, aka social media, or pick up your phone, really, you should establish a pre-phone ritual. Pause, pray, center your heart and mind. Recognize you're about to jump into an ocean of information, much of it toxic. Recognize that much of what you're about to consume is a carefully curated facade, and most content is presented from a single partial perspective. You need to approach what you read with discernment and empathy, understanding that people often speak, judge, and project moral certainty through the lens of their own past experience, wounds, and real formation in their own life. And so it's important to have a ritual where before you engage with information, you center your mind and your heart and affirm yourself with some good truth. Given how partisan the traditional media is and how social media is, how do citizens ensure that you have the best information before taking a position on the story? For example, we're talking about these Minneapolis shootings. How do you take a good position on this if you are listening to the news, if you are reading the newspaper?
It's hard work. I am not going to lie. I have found it very hard to get this type of news and this type of information that you're talking about. If you want to know the truth, which in my opinion has become very precious, it's going to take grit, it's going to take patience and self-awareness. You have to resist the temptation to jump to a conclusion, which is our natural inclination. We want to get to an answer quickly, but you have to force yourself. You have to, as soon as you have the situation in front of you, be ready to embark on a journey of understanding facts. It may take 4 hours, it may take 8 hours, it may take 3 days. You should ignore the temptation when somebody asks you the question on social media or pings you or messages you. A lot of people feel the pressure to give an answer because otherwise you'll feel like you do not know. So nobody wants to feel like the person who's dumb. So they want to respond. So you respond with something. The wise person keeps silent until he or she knows the entirety of the story and speaks sparingly. This is a sign of wisdom. How partisan and distorted our media, social media can be, we have to now start having a more deliberate information gathering strategy. That's kind of what you were alluding to put your phones apart, get into your mindset. It is absolutely imperative in this day and age, especially the more charged the topics are, like this incident in Minnesota. Let me give you some examples on how like some practice on how to get this done. Number one, learn to triangulate. If you are in the data analysis business like I am, you know the importance of triangulation, right? I guess an analogy would be, if somebody wants to know where you are traveling in a car, they cannot just look at one cell tower to find your location. They need multiple cell towers so they can triangulate to your correct spot. If you use one cell tower, it gives you a radius that car is in. If you have a second one, it gives you two overlapping. If you have a third one, you now start pinpointing and tightening the circle of where the person is. I think information is so much like that. So anytime you have, the more sensitive and charged the topic is, the more you want to triangulate. Read at least one national mainstream outlet, one serious local outlet, one source that does not share your ideological lean. If all of them agree, okay, that's good. If you see that they are not agreeing, what does that mean? You need more sources to triangulate, right? I'll give you my example. Again, that's why I said it's hard work, right? I consistently read different media outlets, and like online or on my phone or my computer. So I look at Associated Press, CNN, Bloomberg, all these kind of lean left, right? Then in the central bucket, I do BBC, Reuters, The Hill, Christian Science Monitor. Like these are all like in the middle, kind of centerish. Then towards the right, I have News Nation that leans a little center right, and then you have Fox, right? So you see, I'm getting the range of like far left to center left to center right to far right. Now I have enough sources to triangulate my information. If I want international information, I go to Al Jazeera, NDTV, which is Indian news. I go to Al Monitor, which gives me Middle Eastern news. So again, Al Jazeera is something even when I look for, even when to see what they're talking about ICE, by the way. So you can look at foreign media coverage about the US to see what angles people are seeing from abroad. Triangulation. Think of triangulation. As you are looking and reading through media sources, separate data and spin. There's a lot of spin happening, and you'll have to understand what are the underlying numbers, the legal documents, right? We just talked about deportations versus repatriations, removals. It's like, it's easy to confuse somebody with just talking about removals, but you have to bring the whole story together. It's hard work. I can tell you, I worked a little hard to get those numbers together. So distinguish commentary, opinion from news, spin from facts, right? Make sure that you go to the primary sources that are being talked about. Click on them, read through them. As you read through a few of them, you'll understand, wait a minute, that's not what I read. So basically, they're the same fact, but interpreted a little differently, which is what we were talking about in the question before. As you are looking through information and news, check timing. When did it happen? Where did it happen? There are a lot of things that come, especially with AI. Breaking news. You look at it, it's like, wait a minute, breaking news from 10 days ago? You have to be conscious about the timing on when people are saying what. And if sometimes, as soon as something happens and you're like, somebody is saying, giving their informed opinion about the investigation, how did it happen in 30 minutes? That's not possible. So use your faculties of investigation as you are diving through this thing. Again, a good practice is to slow down and use and listen to like long form podcasts or the entire press briefing, not the 30-second clip of Trump saying something or Obama saying something. When you listen to the entirety of the press conference or a long form podcast, you start to get context. It's like, oh, wait a minute. You are answering this question within the context of two questions that you answered before this. But if you just take a clip, it'll sound like it's totally something else. So be aware of that. Plus, long form helps you because to create short form thoughts or segments, people edit more. The more you edit, the more error you're entering into the equation. So be aware of that. And another great thing to have, intentionally have cross-cutting conversations. Engage with people who see things differently from when what you do. But when you do, be careful, right? Be calm, sip your coffee, relax, take it easy. Don't engage emotionally. Set it on facts. Have an understanding ear. I've heard this very good phrase that somebody said, listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Response will come later. Listen to first absorb and understand. Listen to the other person. They may be wrong, but at least try to say, why did you think that? Where did you get this information from? Like, engage. Don't immediately start dissecting it and saying you're wrong. You're a fool to think that way. This is how you should think. Like, don't engage emotionally that way. Engage with facts. Be calm. And we need to force ourselves have these type of civil conversations. Otherwise, we are looking at a demise of a time when we used to be able to come together and talk. I'll give you an anecdotal example, right? My parents, I was raised in the Middle East. My parents are from India, but they used to come together as friends. So, they were all older people. They used to come, they would sip coffee, tea, drink, talk. And before, like 5 minutes into the conversation, volume has amplified like hundredfold. And they're so spirited. And I'm like, they're going to break into a fight. No, they don't. After the conversation, they relax, they talk, they're friends, they meet again next week because they're looking forward to having a spirited conversation. Now what I see is, as soon as somebody has a spirited conversation, they want to defriend that person.
Mhm.
I don't want to talk to this person again. Like, this is not how we are going to move forward. And I would definitely not say we are evolving as people if we go in this direction, right? We have to engage in civil discourse and talk to each other and be personable and understand and be aware. And there's still time, but it takes discipline, it takes self-awareness, and like I said, it takes humility, patience, and grit.
Yeah, and if anyone has like several $1 million sitting on the side, me and Biju would love to open a independent news network that analyzes every news story from every angle and just spits out facts. Just throwing that out there. But you nailed it. The digital economy, it literally knows you better than yourself. It understands which videos will hold your attention for one more second, which comment section you'll linger on just a bit longer. It quietly records the topics you search, often without your own conscious awareness. And when you consume a single media source or one side of an issue, you're not being informed. You're voluntarily surrendering your own thinking. And so true understanding and to be well informed, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work and it's hard. It requires listening to multiple perspectives, reading widely different sources, engaging in real conversations like face to face, eye to eye, not texting, watching diverse content, intentionally stepping outside your comfort zone. I have a challenge to you. If you love Fox, listen to CNN more. If you love MSNBC, listen to Newsmax. Read AP, read Routers, read BBC. Get different perspectives on issues and have an open heart. Now, this is hard because here's what happens. This process creates something called cognitive dissonance. I want you to research this because your body resists it. Your heart rate literally increases, discomfort sets in, and unease follows as your own mental framework and your own mental schema is challenged. Yet this resistance, this challenge is not a sign of harm. It's a signal of learning. Growth requires confronting and overriding your own instinctive reactions in order to think more clearly and more freely. You might be challenged. You may not want to give thought to what you read, but that's how growing happens. It happens by challenging something that you think is true. And as Christians, I think the role is to understand that your lived experience, your trauma, your shared experiences in your community, they feed into your judgment. It's important to escape your echo chamber, analyze facts critically from both sides, and to still love people we vehemently disagree with. That's important. To conclude, we'll ask this question as it ties to illegal immigration because a lot of people feel guilty that when they say no to illegal immigration, that they're violating the golden rule to love one another. Does the command to love one another include allowing illegal immigration to exist, especially as it relates to those who have not committed any crimes, perhaps those who have been here for a long time and have assimilated into society? How do we approach this issue here?
This is a well-meaning question, and there are a lot of well-meaning Christians who are torn. And it's important for our audience to be empathetic to others who don't, who are Christians, who truly are Christians. We will see them in heaven, but they won't share your view. That doesn't mean that if they don't share your view, they're not a Christian. So I think we have got to be careful. The command to love one another comes straight from Jesus in the Gospels, and it absolutely includes loving all of our neighbors, including the undocumented. It doesn't say, there's no exception in there. As a matter of fact, it says, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, right? So it goes even further than that. So love encompasses everything. And remember that some of these undocumented workers, people, are parents we see at soccer games, at the construction sites. Some of them are churchgoers that stand along with us and we just don't realize it. Matthew chapter 25, as an example, calls to welcome the stranger. Leviticus chapter 19 talks about caring for the sojourner that is among us. Love does mean that we can see and we acknowledge the dignity and the families and the contributions that undocumented immigrants have made. The question is, does that mean that love is throwing open the borders and ignoring the laws? No. If you look at Romans chapter 13, it tells us to respect governing authorities. Borders and just laws, right? It should be a just law. They protect the common good. They're there for protection. They deter exploitation. They keep our communities, our families, our children safe. That is love. So love does not cancel the law. But what love does is it demands that the law is humane, it's proportionate, it's realistic. So deporting a decade-long resident, meaning a decade-long undocumented immigrant with US-born citizens and no rap sheet at all, just because they crossed a desert fleeing poverty, is that justice? Unlikely, right? On the other hand, should we just let chaos reign at the border, where cartels profit from drugs that kill thousands of people in the US every year? They kidnap children. They rape women. That is definitely not love, right? It's the opposite of love. So what we see is there is truly a balance to think through here, right? Christian leaders across the spectrum, whether they are Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, many of them support the Dignity Act. They land somewhere in the space of, should we have secure borders? Yes. Should we enforce the laws against criminals and traffickers? Absolutely. But for long-term law abiders, they say, let's offer an earned path. Let them pay a fine for restitution of the one-time illegal entry offense they committed. Pass a background check, learn English, etc., etc., etc. This way, let's offer them a chance to get right with the law. The way they think about it is like, this is love meeting justice, which is exactly what Christ did for us on the cross. And just for context, right? Church history shows this balance. Jesus did not direct his followers to not pay the extremely unjust Roman taxes. What did he say? Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to God what is God's, right? The Apostle Paul asked Onesimus, who was a runaway slave, if you remember, to return to his master, Philemon. And if you think about the US history, abolitionists fought unjust laws while they were still honoring order to get the law overturned. So what is the bottom line? We need to redirect the passion we see in these protests and the frustrations that we are seeing and target it at the source of the problem, which is Congress, right? Congress is the most powerful branch of government where pertinent immigration laws are passed and they need to be revised to take care of the problem we are seeing in the streets. If people are not feeling happy, it's because the law needs adaptation. And remember that the executive branch, the Trump administration, simply executes a law as passed by Congress, which, by the way, is their obligation. Their obligation, then, by the way, this question, just so our audience has context, was asked to President Obama when he was in the presidency, and they were asking why this inhumane treatment of undocumented immigrants. And he said the very same answer: that's not on me. I am just obeying the law. It is I am obligated to follow the law that has been passed by Congress. So the question for our generation is, can we love our neighbors, which includes undocumented immigrants, enough to demand a fix to the broken immigration system? Target your anger to the source of the problem. Or are we going to use our outrage and eat each other and kill each other? Loving one another is a hard call, to be merciful within the boundaries of the law as long as it is just, right? And making sure that we hold human lives to be more precious than scoring political points. This is the Christian way to solve this problem.
Excellent response. And as you alluded to, this intersection of love, immigration, and public policy is deeply nuanced, and invoking a single Bible verse as the basis for a broad legal framework, it risks oversimplifying this complex and moral and civic reality into a single statement. To begin with, right, we shouldn't overlook the rule of law, as you mentioned. If breaking the law is excused on the basis of a beneficial outcome, maybe cheap labor or diversifying your community, we're undermining the very principle of the rule of law. For that logic, any crime could be justified if it claims to serve a greater societal good. For example, if I steal a car and then donate the proceeds to charity, am I saying that's okay? If I steal someone's toys and donate them to a sick kid in a hospital, well, isn't that okay if I'm allowed to undermine the law for something that's good? It's a really dangerous line of reasoning because once we start excusing certain violations of the law, we erode the very foundation that keeps our laws meaningful, especially as it relates to immigration. Now, when this nuanced situation arises, when someone has lived in the country unlawfully for a decade, or more, yet has fully assimilated, they've worked, they've paid taxes, they're a good citizen, they're in good standing. This prolonged non-enforcement begins to resemble government acquiescence rather than mere discretion. A law that's not enforced, it really loses its normative authority and functions less as prohibition than as silent permission. In such cases, we should seriously consider what are the legal, lawful pathways to citizenship that reflect both the rule of law and the realities created by long-term inaction. For example, if John Doe has worked here for 10 years, they pay taxes, his kids play soccer, they've assimilated, they contribute to society. We need to consider what is the most ethical and compassionate way to handle this human being who's lived here for 10 years as a good citizen. Now, on the flip side, as a Christian, I reject the idea that openly embracing mass illegal immigration is inherently loving simply because we are called to love one another. I don't think you can use a single Bible verse to justify mass illegal immigration. In practice, though this seems loving, such a position is actually unloving towards the poor, it's unloving towards the underprivileged and marginalized in your own society. Charity is, by its own nature, it's selective. You love your spouse, you choose fidelity with your own spouse, and therefore you're excluding every other woman. You devote time and care for your own kids, you're exclusively saying that my intention is with you, not for every other kid on the block. And so public policy, it operates under the same moral reality. Extending care to one group requires the intentional allocation of finite resources, right? We don't have all the money in the world to take care of everyone in the world, right? There are finite resources, which inevitably excludes others. For this reason, right, unfettered, open immigration policies, they may appear compassionate on the surface, but they really risk neglecting the obligations owed to a nation's own citizens, especially the most vulnerable among us. And so we need to ask the hard question, by loving people, who am I not loving? And in the case of open, unfettered immigration policy, we're doing a very unloving thing to our own citizenry. And so we need to think about this from a different perspective. Again, we believe people are made in the image of God, but that doesn't translate, in my opinion, to open immigration policy where anyone can just walk in. Obviously, a very loaded topic here. We talked about a lot when it comes to what's happening in our country. Encourage our readers to listen in, rewind, really think through some of these things we talked about. Challenge your own perspective of what you listen to and who you talk to. Practice compassion to those who have different viewpoints from your own. We want to thank you for listening. Encourage you to like and subscribe to our podcast, A Balanced Lens, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.